Well, it's great to be with you once again, and I'm very excited. I hope you're excited too. And I hope you're excited to exalt Jesus and bring Him glory. I'm excited to get into the teaching part, but before we jump into that, let's just spend a few moments worshiping Him through song. And so if you would, why don't you just stand and let's sing together, and then we will jump into the teaching here in just a few moments.
This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lifted high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you.
So, would you say that you're content right now? Like, truly content? So today we're going to talk about contentment, obviously. Godly contentment in our circumstances is a sign of spiritual maturity. And I would guess that you would agree with me. I hope you would agree with me, or I guess it doesn't matter if you agree with me or not. But could you see that, or could we make the statement that it's very hard to be content in a materialistic society in which we live in today? I mean, I think it's very challenging in our society today, in our culture today, to be content, because we live in this spirit of materialism. Like, there's always something better, there's always something newer, there's always something that's promised to us, that's going to be delivered to us, that's going to make us more happy, right? And so this isn't something new. I mean, this existed in Paul's day and age as well. In the Roman Empire, they were known for luxury and excess, very much so in their time. But he lived in the middle of that as well. But yet he was able to write this statement a verse that we're going to look at a little bit later, where he says, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstance I find myself in. Okay, I kind of paraphrased that a little bit, but Paul's talking. That's what Paul's talking about. So this is God's goal for us as Christians as we mature to become more godly. Okay, Christian contentment. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And our text is going to be in chapter 4. If you want to turn there, chapter 4, verses 10 through 14. And in this particular passage of Scripture, Paul says this: I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, because once again you renewed your care for me. You were, in fact, concerned about me, but lacked the opportunity to show it. I don't say this out of need, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. I know how to make do with little, and I know how to make do with a lot. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or in need. I am able to do all things through Him who strengthens me. Still, you did well by partnering with me in my hardship. So today, what I'd like for us to do in the next few moments is talk about contentment and this passage of Scripture in which Paul says, you know what? I've learned how to be content in all my circumstances. Whatever circumstance I find myself in, I've learned to be content. Well, I've learned how to be content when I had a lot, when I don't have enough. Whatever circumstance I find myself in, I've learned to be content. Now, I think the first thing we want to ask ourselves this question is this, or talk about is this: what is Christian, or what Christian contentment is not? Like, what is contentment that he's talking about? If we could look at it that way. What is contentment, Christian contentment? What is that? What does it look like? What is it that Paul's talking about? Well, the first thing I want to share with you is this: what it's not. I think it's safe to say, or I would like for us to take a look at this and say, Christian contentment does not mean that we are content with everything in our lives, especially our spirituality. Let me say that again. The concept of Christian contentment, in which Paul's talking about here, does not mean that we are content with everything within our lives, especially our spirituality. Now, I want to talk about being content in our spirituality, okay, and how we should not be content in our spirituality, okay? I don't want this to come off as browbeating or anything like that, or negative by any means. But I want us to take a look at that because I don't believe that's what Paul's talking about, where he's saying just be content in your spirituality. You don't have to grow anymore. You don't have to, you don't have to be concerned about your prayer life or concerned about witnessing or whatever it may be. I don't think that's what Paul's talking about. So, in fact, if we would go back to chapter 3, he talks about pressing on, right? He talks about, makes certain statements like, not that I've already achieved this. I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. Not that I've, already achieved this or I've already arrived. Or one part he says, I'm going to forget what lies behind me so that I will continue forward. I will continue to reach forward to what lies ahead. He talks about pressing on towards the goal. He talks about working out our salvation in fear and trembling. We spent some time talking about that. So with that being said, I truly believe that Paul is not saying you need to be content in your spirituality. You're saved, just pull up a lawn chair, wait till Jesus returns and takes you to heaven. I truly don't believe that is what Paul is getting at. I don't, just like him, none of us have arrived. Meaning that we are on this journey and we're continuing. Remember, we talked about this being sanctification, where we're constantly becoming more into the image of Jesus. We're taking on more of His characteristics. We're becoming more loving, more patient, more full of joy, the fruit of the Spirit. God continues to keep edging and chiseling away our humanness to where we become more like Him. And so I believe that's a process. That is a journey that we're going to be on, and that's not going to stop until we see Jesus face to face and receive our new bodies, our glorified bodies, and we spend eternity with Him in heaven. So therefore, when we talk about being content, I don't think this applies to our spirituality. It's kind of like, if you're familiar with Nick Saban, just a couple sports analogies here, or examples, if I could use these. Nick Saban, if you're familiar with who he is, which by the way, he's from West Virginia, so he is kind of a good guy. He's a coach of Alabama, University of Alabama, and I believe to this date he has won more collegiate football national championships than any other coach. And a reporter once asked him one time if he had found satisfaction in the championships he won. And Nick Saban emphatically said no. And he said this, "It's a slippery pole from the penthouse to the outhouse in this business. And satisfaction is the slippery pole." So what he was saying is, there's not a time to be satisfied with where you are, or if you do become satisfied, you're going to slide down the pole. You're going to slip and you're going to slide down to the pole and you're going to end up in the outhouse. That's what Nick Saban says about satisfaction, or being satisfied in winning the championships. Tom Brady, another one, played for the University of Michigan. And he is, I believe he has won more Super Bowls than any other quarterback, right? And he was asked one time about, is this, and I'm going to paraphrase it, but are you satisfied with this? He had just won a Super Bowl. Are you satisfied with this Super Bowl ring? And he's like, no, I want the next one. There's always the next one. So both of these guys are communicating. There's not a time to drop the guard. We continue on. And I think Paul's saying the same thing. And I think when we talk about contentment, when Paul's referring to contentment, it's we never should be content with our spirituality. We should never be content with just how holy that we are in the current state, because God, I believe, wants to continue to make us more holy. Now, again, I'm not trying to be discouraging here whatsoever. That's not my point. It's not to say that we're not good enough, and that's not the intent of this point. It's just the point that says we should never be content with where we're at. We should always want to grow more in Christ. We should always want to spend more time in prayer with Him. We're amping up our level of prayer life with God. We should always want to be drawing nearer and nearer to Him through our worship, right? We should never be content with the people that we're witnessing to. We should never be content with just the koinonia that we've got. Our church should never be content with just with how we're doing things, or how we're in our worship, or reaching more people, or helping people grow more spiritually, or counseling people, or doing koinonia together. We should never be content, because as soon as we're content within our personal lives, when it comes to our spirituality, or within our church, if we become content, that's when complacency sets in. And again, that's what Nick Saban and Tom Brady's kind of saying in a secular world, and that's not where we're going at it whatsoever, but it kind of translates to what we're talking about here, that as soon as we drop our guard, that's when we become complacent, okay? So I truly believe that Paul is not talking about being content with our spirituality, okay? So let's define what Christian contentment is then. Paul says, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstances. Now that's the word that he used, circumstances, in the translation that I have, in the circumstances, which other translations may translate it to conditions or a state or whatever it is. But Paul's not talking about spirituality or ministry, because we should never be content with those. But what he is saying is, I'm content in whatever circumstance that I find myself in. His financial condition, his physical condition, he does not allow those things to determine his spiritual happiness and his well-being. Okay? It's so much greater than that. And again, we have to understand, I've been reminding us of this almost on a weekly basis, that the circumstances in which Paul was in when he wrote this letter was he was in prison. Now, what's really interesting is, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but the prison system then is not like our prison system now. The prison system now that they kind of have some amenities and rights and things like that within the prison system. For instance, they get food, they get shelter, they get clothing, they get some other amenities in the prison system of today. In Paul's day, and this is what I was trying to share with you, it was so much different. Prisoners had to depend upon the loved ones that they had in their lives to bring them clothing, to bring them food, to bring them medicine, and any other special needs that they might have. Prisoners had to rely upon their loved ones. Now, if you remember, when we first started this series in chapter 1, we looked through Paul's writing and what he was telling us. His friends had deserted him. His friends had deserted him. His colleagues had deserted him. In fact, there was a guy that came to visit him, and we talked about this. One of his friends came to visit him and bring him some stuff and things like that, but he didn't even know where Paul was at. No one even knew where Paul was at. They knew he was in a prison system, but everyone had deserted him for the most part. So Paul literally is in prison. There was evidently a time where he didn't have financial need, clothing, who knows about food, whatever it may be. He did not have those things that were the basics and necessities of just living, even in a prison system. And so it's quite interesting then for Paul to say, and in verse 11 he says, not that I speak from want, but then he gives us these, he says, but I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. All right? For I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances that I am in. So we see within this writing that he was going through some times where he didn't have anything. I mean, nothing. And again, it's hard for us to conceptualize that he might have went without food for a while. He might have went without clothing, clean clothing, or clothing in general. He might have went without medicine. He might have went without some other, whatever it may be. There were things that he learned to be literally content in whatever circumstance he found himself in. And I think, he said it, I've learned to be what it means to be content when I have a lot of these things, and I've learned to be content when I don't have any of these things. So, he elaborated on some of these things about being hungry and going in abundance and suffering and need and stuff like that. So he's speaking out about his physical condition, right? So here's what's interesting. There's a couple lessons that you and I can learn from this in our world today. And when we think about what Christian contentment truly is, the first one is this: our circumstances don't make us happy. That's a hard one. That's a blurry line, I think, for us, especially as we live in a materialistic society. We are bombarded with this thought that if I can just obtain this is going to make my life easier and I'm going to be more happy. If I could just upgrade my house, if I could just get a bigger house, if I could get a better car, if I could get a Tesla, an electric car, right? Not me, but nevertheless, for some it could be. But if I could just obtain this, if I could obtain this level of education, if I could obtain this girlfriend, if I could obtain this boyfriend, if I could have this relationship, if I could obtain this job, if I could, whatever it is, it's easy for us to fall into that mindset that my circumstances is what drives my happiness. And when that happens, we're off the path, because that is not the case. Our circumstances is not what makes the differences. It's our spiritual outlook that determines our well-being, and Jesus is the one who is in the middle of our circumstances. So if we're focused on temporal possessions or temporal things, and we're saying those things are the things that's going to make me happy in my circumstances, we're on an endless journey. We're always going to be chasing the wild goose. It's not going to happen, because where we become happy is with a person of Jesus, the relationship with Jesus. It is our spiritual outlook that determines our well-being. That's what Paul is teaching us here, and that's what we can learn. The first thing about Christian contentment is that our circumstances doesn't make us happy, but it's Jesus. Jesus is the one that makes us happy. When we have when we have Him, our spiritual outlook literally changes, and that's when we truly find contentment. Okay? Now, the second thing is this. So the first one is our circumstances don't make us happy. The second thing is this: if we're going to have the attitude of contentment in this world, there might be times as Christians we've got to swim upstream, and that is not pleasant. We literally have to swim upstream. Think about it. We're bombarded by the media on a daily basis, and all the businesses, their goal is to make us discontent so that we will buy their product. We have to swim upstream to say, you know what, that's not true. It's not true. And what's interesting, and I think if you track back on this phenomenon, this materialistic phenomenon, or whatever we want to call it, more or less started right after World War II, right? It has just continued to get, but because I think you had generations that went through the Depression. They went through a time where they didn't have things. You only had what you had, and you had to be very wise with what you had. You had to learn to deal with and to function, to live within your means. That is foreign to us in our society now. If we can't live within our means, we can go apply for credit. We can go get a credit card. We can go, whatever it is, but we can go above and live above and beyond our means, which causes stress at times, which really shows us that, validates the fact that American families nowadays typically spend more than they take in every month. Typically. That doesn't mean all of us, but a typical American family spends more than they bring in a month. We're not happy with the house we have, though it may fully meet our needs. We don't like the car we have anymore because it may not drive itself. It may not have all the latest and greatest technology with it. We may need the newest phone because it's going to help us become more efficient, right? And it has more of the bells and whistles. It's got more of the updated apps on it and all this other stuff. But what happens is, again, it's a wild goose chase. It is a wild goose chase. We never get there. It's like there's always tomorrow. When are you going to diet? Tomorrow. When are you going to start working out? Tomorrow. It's always tomorrow. There's always tomorrow, right? And we get into this circular, cyclical spiral, in a sense, and we're always dissatisfied because there's always something else out there that can make me happy. Because we haven't learned to swim upstream in the culture, the materialistic culture that we live in now. As a Christian, there's a time where we say no. As a Christian, we say, no, I'm going to live within my means. As a Christian, we begin to realize that I don't need the bigger house, the better car, the whatever it may be, because I know that that's not going to bring me happiness or contentment, okay? It's not based upon that. Now, listen, I'm not trying to speak some idealistic message here where we don't never buy anything, where something wears out and we never can replace it. That's not the point. You get the point here. I don't want the pendulum to swing clear over here, okay? Let's keep it in the middle. What we're saying is that it means that we're not always looking for the next biggest and greatest thing to buy. Okay? It means that we don't get caught up in the shopper's high and all that stuff, and we're not looking for satisfaction and fulfillment, all this other, we're constantly in that chase, right? It just means as we begin to learn Christian contentment that as I said already, number one, our circumstances don't make us happy, okay? That's not what, that means. To just change our circumstances. It doesn't mean that we're going to be happy. And secondly, contentment, in this world, we may have to swim upstream as Christians. And hopefully you heard that point, and this is not coming across as some doom and gloom. It's just taking a look at what Paul said and realizing, hey, this guy, he learned it. He discovered it. He discovered the secret. In the key verse, so let's talk about the secret of Christian contentment. Okay? The key verse is found in 13. And it's a verse that we have quoted many times. Chapter 4, verse 13. This is a verse that we've quoted many times, and I think a lot of times we take it out of context. Because in verse 13, he says this, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Okay? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, I think what Paul is saying is this, I can be content. I can be content in whatever physical circumstance God places me in, okay? Because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. That's the context of that verse. We pluck it out. We take it out of context at times. And we may say this, I can be the best salesman because Christ, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can be the salutatorian, the valedictorian of my class because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can be the best quarterback. I can be the best musician. I can be the best nurse. I can be the best teacher. I can be the best whatever it may be because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. That's taking it out of context. That is not what Paul is saying. You can't just take this verse and extract that piece out and apply it to whatever it is that you want to do and saying that I can be the best at whatever that I want to do because I can do all things through Christ. That's not what Paul is saying. That's not what he's saying. Because when we do that, what we're saying is this, whatever I choose to do, whatever it is that I'm putting my mind to, whatever it is that I'm determining to do, I can do all things. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. The emphasis then becomes on you. It becomes very self-centered. That's not what I believe Paul is telling us here. What Paul, I believe, is telling us is this. Paul is acknowledging that whatever circumstance that he finds himself in, that God has placed him there. And if God has placed him there, there's a reason for that to help build the kingdom, help share the gospel, and God will give me the strength to do all things through Christ. That's what I believe Paul's saying. Paul's saying this is about God. This isn't about me. Remember a couple of weeks ago we talked about this where Paul acknowledged, I'm in prison for the advancement of the gospel of Christ. Therefore, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength because it's for His purpose. It's for His mission. It's for His glory. It's for His exaltation. It's not for mine. It's for His. So you see where we can kind of take that passage, that verse out of context? Paul's saying, if you want to be content, which he is, if we want to be like Paul and be content, and regardless of whatever circumstance we find ourselves in, we have to believe that God is going to use us, and God has placed us there for a particular reason. And because of that, God will give us, we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. God will give us the strength through Christ to accomplish those things. Meaning that it's about Jesus. It's not about us, it's about Jesus. It's about His will. It's about His kingdom. Jesus is the one who makes the difference. Jesus is the one who saved us. Jesus is the one who placed His Spirit within our hearts. Jesus is the one who gives us a home in heaven, right? That we're going to spend eternity with. But it's all about Jesus. We can be content in any situation here on earth through Christ, through Jesus, who strengthens us. He is the one that makes the difference. He is our hope. He is our hope. He is the one that will give us the strength to overcome regardless of the situation we're in. But we believe, though, that whatever situation we're in and circumstance we're in, we're there for a purpose for Him, for His glory, for His exaltation, not me. Do you understand? It's not about me. It's not about me being the best that I can be. It's about God giving me the ability to accomplish what it is that He wants me to accomplish. It's all about His will. It's all about His doing. It's about His mission. It's all about Jesus. It's about Jesus. And when we discover that, that's when the paradigm shifts happen. That's when our perspectives change, because yes, we can do all things through Christ because we believe we're here for a reason and a purpose, and it's not particularly mine, it's God's. It's God's, and Jesus will see it through. Jesus will make it happen. So, regardless of what we have, where we're at, as Christians, we can always be content. We can always be content. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. We have to understand that our circumstances isn't what drives happiness. When our circumstances change, that doesn't mean that we're going to be happy. Jesus is the one, when our perspectives shift and understand that it's about Him, that's when we find happiness and joy. But we may have to swim upstream. We may have to swim upstream and acknowledge that it's not this outside influence that's going to change things, because our circumstances aren't going to make us happy, but it's the person of Jesus, of being right smack dab in the will of God. So let's end by asking the same question we started with. Are you content? Do you believe that your circumstances drives you being content? Or is it something else? Is it Jesus? Is it Jesus? I pray that you discover, or have discovered, or will discover that it's all about Jesus. And I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying swimming upstream is easy. I'm saying that's what we're called to do, and it's hard. But God will give us the strength. Jesus will give us the strength that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, but it's for His glory and His exaltation, not mine. I hope that you leaned into this, and I hope you have a great week, and I hope you bring God His glory and you find contentment in the person of Jesus Christ.